Okay, guys and girls, so if you're looking at this, please just take a look at the focus question, write it down, pause the video. This will be the focus question for today. Not a very long lesson, probably about 15 to 25 minutes, depending on the speed that you work. But ultimately, if you take a look at the focus question, we got to do the notes first, and then we'll get into today's assignment. If you're watching this, you're probably watching it, you're taking the MAPS exam, so you're not seeing this live, which is fine. So the focus question is, why did the government originally support big business during the Progressive era? There was a disconnect between the people who kind of wanted this progressive change and reform, especially from the monopoly owners, especially for the workers. You have the labor unions. So the government isn't originally a huge fan of that. Okay, basically there are about 6 or 7 progressive era presidents. The first 3 or 4 aren't exactly as on board as the last 3 in terms of change and in terms of progress. All right, so let's take a look at this here. Please copy down here what's on the right. Let's talk about an issue that's happening out in the Midwest and the Great Plains that certainly has caused a bit of an issue, and it's going to be centered around the railroad. Now, if you remember, the railroad was actually the first monopoly that was broken up, so hypothetically, the railroad should be doing a lot better, but there's going to be some issues here that don't go exactly as well as you think. When the Sherman Antitrust Act, when the Interstate Commerce Act essentially bans monopolies on railroads because of the trade between the states, we're going to have some big problems. Okay, so there's going to be many railroad owners. The biggest one is, his name is George Pullman. Okay, still, even though there was not a monopoly, even though you have the labor unions, they were still not paying fair wages. They were still making people work long hours and firing people for no reason. It's like a teacher that, says there's going to be a rule change, or let's say you're at a school and there's going to be a rule change that says we're now going to make sure that all students are wearing uniforms. Well, if no one actually enforces the law, kids can still kind of take advantage. And this is kind of what happens here. George Pullman doesn't really follow the new labor unions, doesn't really follow the new laws, and it leads to one of the biggest strikes, in American history. So first off, let's say a couple of things. Just as a reminder, a strike is when a group of workers basically choose to not work. Okay, and this is a situation that happens here in 1894. Okay, so basically the railroad workers are going to go on a huge strike. Now, what is particularly interesting or bad about this strike is that the things in this strike got very violent. Okay, there was a lot of basically riots throughout this time, and we had a tough decision as a country do we need to make. Does our president want to side with the railroad workers, or do they want to side with the big business owners? And at first, the president this time, his name is Grover Cleveland, basically had to side with the railroad owners for a couple of reasons. Now, number one, obviously things got violent. So you have a tricky situation here. Do you bring in the state police out in the Midwest, or do you bring in the military? And in this case, they brought in the U.S. military to stop the strike and basically force the railroad workers back to work. Now, the really tricky thing here, ladies and gentlemen, is that this is a president acting as commander-in-chief, very similar to any time a president used the military. But this is now kind of on people who are unhappy, and striking is kind of like protesting, but when a protest turns violent, it becomes a tricky situation of, keeping the peace, and, kind of making sure things are, people are still allowed to kind of protest and strike. But since this strike turned violent, it became a situation where the military had to be brought in. This happens when there's protests that turn to riots, whether it's, if it's over the summer, Black Lives Matter. Sometimes the military could be brought in, though that wasn't too often. Sometimes in in January, when we had the Capitol thing, that became something where the military kind of got brought in, the National Guard. All right, so this is the president acting as a commander-in-chief. President Grover Cleveland sided with the railroad owners and business along with the Supreme Court, saying that the railroad workers were not allowing interstate commerce to occur. So this is also the second tricky situation, okay? When a railroad worker goes on strike, that means trade and travel is not happening. That means you're now hurting the economy from succeeding, all right? Just if teachers were going on strike, we are hurting the kids when teachers go on strike. That's why teachers don't go on strike too often, because even though we may be unhappy, there is the cause that we are now hurting children because they're not getting the education that they need, and that's why you don't see too many teacher strikes. You also probably don't see too many railroad strikes because of the Pullman strike and the government kind of stepping in saying, like, you know, we get you're unhappy, we need to maybe make some changes, but you can't go on strike because you're hurting our country's economy now. All right, so to summarize, the federal government early on, okay, you have presidents here. I'm just going to name them: Chester Arthur, Grover Cleveland, and Benjamin Harrison. They are known as the Gilded Age presidents. They're known as the big business presidents. They all kind of look the same. You also have James Garfield, who got assassinated in his first year, which we don't talk about. But these were the kind of bearded presidents. Actually, let me just see if I can put that out quick. Gilded Age presidents. Let's see. If I have a quick image, I can just show you them quick. Yeah, good enough. Okay, we'll take a look here. Yeah, so really I consider the Gilded Age presidents to be the ones 21 through 24. 17 through 19, the Reconstruction presidents, and William McKinley I don't really consider a Gilded Age president. He's kind of an in-between one. So James Garfield has, you know, facial hair. Chester Arthur has facial hair. Grover Cleveland has facial hair, right? Benjamin Harris, facial hair. Grover Cleveland, facial hair. They all kind of, you know, have this kind of bearded, mustache type of look, okay, throughout this time. Interesting, just a random fact about Grover Cleveland, I just think it's kind of good to know. We have had 46 presidents, okay, in office, but we've really only had 45 human beings. That is because Grover Cleveland is the 22nd and the 24th president. He ran for 2 terms, just not consecutively. So that's why we have 46 presidents, but only 45 human bodies that have been president. I don't know if that really makes sense. All right, anyway, so those ones, 20 through 24, were very big in helping out big business, okay? They favored the business owners more than the people that went on strike, and this definitely led to some issues because it seemed like the government was more in favor of the big business owners and making money and being a little bit greedy, and that's sometimes one of the knocks on the Gilded Age presidents was they weren't really speaking for the middle class and the poorer people, and this was an example of that. This will change soon, though. You'll see a shift in how the presidents handle, you know, some of these strikes and some of these monopolies a little bit later on in big business. Okay, that will come, you know, within the next few days. All right, and you'll do some August 2019 DBQ practice. This is something where you can kind of go into. Now, admittedly, I don't spend too much time on the big strikes throughout the Gilded Age. I think you get the point of the strikes. Okay, the ones that we need to know more for the Regents were the ones that turned violent. We don't really talk about the ones that were peaceful and usually more effective. So I give you 2 from your textbook. So again, textbook Thursday is due tonight. You should be able to read about it tonight. The railroad strikes of 1877, the Haymarket Affair of 1886, and the Pullman strike of 1894 show that labor unions of that period were what? Give me a second to look through it. All right, correct answer for that one's going to be 1, willing to use force or violence to achieve their goal. It's a, you know, complicated thing because when you kind of use force, you kind of use violence, you sometimes, you know, lose the idea, but sometimes it maybe makes the message a little stronger. Depends your opinion on these things. But ultimately, it's willing to use force to achieve their goals. Correct answer is 1. That's going to take us to this. I don't know why, I do love that song. Okay, so obviously you can pause the video and get out your Supreme Court Cases graphic organizer, which is located in the classwork tab under Supreme Court cases. This is our major Supreme Court case for the Progressive era, and one of the biggest ones for Unit 4. I actually lumped the 2 together. There are 2 here. You don't need to write two separate boxes, but if you could kind of squeeze UC, US versus EC Knight Company from 1895 and Northern Securities Company versus United States. You don't need to know the difference or the historical circumstances, but we need to kind of go after and talk about the law that we learned about on Monday, which is known as the Sherman Antitrust Act. How do we make sure that monopolies are being broken up? It's not an easy thing to do. Like, how do you have one of the biggest businesses and most powerful businesses broken up? How do we make sure that other companies are able to sell money? Okay, so the one we're going to kind of look at is the EC Knight one. Okay, because Northern Securities Company is a very similar case. All right, but let's look at the EC Knight one in terms of what we're writing into our graphic organizer. Okay, so this is the first interpretation of the Sherman Antitrust Act. EC Knight Company, they were a sugar monopoly. Okay, so they pretty much traded all of the sugar throughout the United States. They made all of the sugar. They imported all the sugar. You can't grow sugar in the United States, really. You have to import it from other countries and other territories. And they were the ones responsible for trading that sugar throughout the United States. They were by far the largest company, definitely a monopoly. But they kind of still existed after the Sherman Antitrust Act. Okay, so let's go over what the ruling is and I'll explain it. So they ruled in our Supreme Court that Congress had the right to protect small businesses from large monopolies, which is a good thing. Okay, you want to make sure that even if you're a small business, you're able to do what you want to do and not be taken over by large companies. And that manufacturing a good was a state right. Okay, so I do know a little bit about this. My wife does sell teacher bags. Okay, she sells the teacher bags in New Jersey. So she has to pay a state tax on that. This is thanks to the Supreme Court case because the states are the ones that control the manufacturing of a product. So if you want to grow a business, you have to do it in a state. You're obviously going to have to follow the state laws. However, manufacturing was a good and a state right and not a federal right, despite it being traded between states. So we have a complicated thing. Gibbons versus Ogden says, okay, when you trade a product, it now becomes a federal right, and it does, but not if you're manufacturing here. It becomes a state right. So basically just kind of showing that it's like for the first time ever in the Supreme Court history where we actually give the states more rights. If you go back to Marbury versus Madison, Gibbons versus Ogden, McCullough versus Maryland, couple of others. Okay, the federal government seems to always kind of take control from some of these Supreme Court cases. This is not one of those times. It ruled that Congress had the right to protect small business from large monopolies. Okay, and this is now the first step, really before the presidents do. This is the first step in the government or the Supreme Court really trying to help out the small businesses and stop monopolies from getting too much power. And if it's a state right, that means it can't be really a monopoly. Okay, a little bit complicated, I'm sure, but this is not a huge Supreme Court case, but definitely one I've seen come up. Let's see. So let's try this one. The importance of Northern Securities Company versus the United States is that the Supreme Court did what? All right, that correct answer is going to be 1. Okay, it's just taking a law that we had and making sure that a monopoly gets broken up. And that's kind of what happens here in the Supreme Court case where the EC Knight Company had a sugar monopoly and traded sugar throughout the United States and basically broke that monopoly up. Okay. Cool. All right, let's go into this here. Very straightforward stuff. This should not take you long, 5-10 minutes. Okay. Please remember, textbook Thursday is due tonight, so please go back and get that taken care of. All right, if you haven't already. But you have a DBQ scaffold practice. Just remember, as per usual, I shouldn't have to do at this point. You just have to RQ, restate quote. You have about 4 questions from 3 documents. Okay, so you look through the document, okay, look at it, restate quote. Okay, same thing, restate quote. This is all on the Pullman strike and some of the violence that occurred. You look at some different ones here. Okay, you see the violence here from document 2B. Okay, with the with the railroad cars that were set on fire, as you could tell. All right, and then document 3. So you just restate quote, restate quote, restate quote for the 4 questions, and then you guys are done. All right, that's it. I hope you guys have a good rest of your day, and please let me know if you have any questions from today's lesson. Just send me an email.